What's up, challengers? Welcome to the gym. My name is Gym Leader Geo, and this is episode 2 of Geo Teaches Trainers. This is the show where battlers of all skill levels can come to practice and hone and discuss Pokemon tactics and skills that will help them improve in the meta. As a quickie note before we get started, I just want to say as a disclaimer, I don't claim to be the best battler of all time, but I do have a lot of experience in competitive play, tournament play, and ladder experience also, and I think some of my knowledge can be helpful to provide a new look on Pokemon battling for players both new and old. So let's get into GTT episode number 2 right now. Today we're talking about leads. As always, I'll post the table of contents on the screen right now. You guys can use this as a fast forward to specific topics that interest you, or you can watch all the way through and see as much of my smiling face as possible and get the full message. So, we're going to start off with a metagame lead history. So, why the history lesson, you might be asking? And I want to say right now, it is important to know for the current meta of Pokemon where it's come from over the past few generations. It didn't just meta changes don't just spring up anew every generation, like all the threats just completely go away and then you redecide them. There's a lot of Pokemon that join the meta that cause shifts, but for the most part, Pokemon don't just become useless when there's a new gen change unless that gen did something to make them useless. So a threat from Gen 4 might still be a threat in Gen 5, might be slightly less of a threat in Gen 6, but it's still there, and it's important to know why they were a threat in the first place. Another thing to consider is players might really like that Pokemon. They might absolutely love Infernape, for example, who was a big threat in Gen 4 as a suicide lead, but then might have fallen out of favor in Gen 5 and even more so in Gen 6. It's important to know what these threats are, because if you see a team that has some of these threats, you'll remember from this video or from your own experience why they were a threat in the first place. So let's get started. I'm going to try and run through this really quickly because I know the history lesson can be boring, but there is a lot of knowledge in here that'll help you guys learn. So Gen 2 was kind of the birth of hazards. I'm not going to talk on Gen 1. Gen 1 meta, I barely knew anything about. I was a kid. I'm going to start with Gen 2 just because that's when hazards were born. Spikes versus Rapid Spin was really the deciding factor of Gen 2 leads. Spikes were just one layer, 12.5% of max HP. That's it. And you just had someone either set them up or spin them away. Gen 3, you start getting what I call the lead meta. That's when the lead meta was born. Prior to Gen 3, it didn't really matter when a rapid spinner came on the field. If someone was setting up spikes, you were spinning them away. That's basically what they did. They would try and kill the spiker if they could, but a lot of the times that was pretty difficult. Gen 3 created a few important lead considerations that didn't exist in Gen 2. For one, Taunt came out in Gen 3, so you could stop spikers before they even started. 2 was Fake Out was born. It wasn't super important yet, but it will have a huge impact on the meta later, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Spikes are now 3 layers instead of just 1, so it was important to stop that, nip that right in the bud. And Choice Band was introduced. I'll get to why that's so important in a second. What did Gen 3 do to leads? There was Taunt to stop spikers before they start, obviously. But it created more than that. It created hazard setters. It created answer to hazard setters beyond just getting rid of them. It's not just about rapid spinning away, like I said before, because of Taunt and Fake Out and all that. It also made hazards more dangerous because spikes could go up to 3 layers now, dealing 25% to anybody that got hit by them. And it also, you started to see abilities begin to influence lead decisions, such as Dugtrio Arena Trap, who could trap and kill a lot of hazard setters, and also mess with baton passers and stuff. Oh no, sorry, because you could baton pass out. Oh no, wait, no, I think that was a recent change. Let's ignore that point for now. But for the reasons I listed just a second ago, fast, strong, flying types became the really popular leads, and you still see them today because flying types want to get into the game early in case Stealth Rocks get up, because they're going to, since they're weak to Stealth Rocks in Gen 6, they're not going to they're not going to have as much opportunity to keep switching in once rocks get set up in current meta. But back then, they were immune to spikes, they were immune to Dugtrier's Arena Trap, and some of them did a lot of damage. So, a really popular one became Choice Band Salamence. His big thing was get in right now, the other player might be running someone to set up hazards, or they might be running a Rapid Spinner, but either way, they don't want to deal with the amount of damage that Choice Band Salamence can put out. You'd see Zapdos for kind of the same reason, but with an additional layer of threat because it could be a baton passer and receiver. Gengar had a super wide move pool. Slacking was the king of hit and run. Jolteon is kind of like Zapdos, really fast baton passer though. That was kind of the benefit of Jolteon. Ninjask also was, you know, the speed boost passer, so he was kind of like that. Gen 3 was big on either hit hard really early or baton passing chains. Baton pass chains got worse and worse each gen, but in Gen 3 they kind of reigned supreme. You'd see some slower Pokemon rather than the fast flying type and stuff like that that would pretty much be there exclusively to counter the hyper common lead. So you'd have Metagross and Melodic, both of which kind of could handle Salamence. You had Swampert, who was kind of offensive and defensive. He might set up with Stealth Rocks, or he might pack Ice Beam to take out the flying leads, stuff like that. The only real Swampert counter you had back in Gen 3 was just a Grass type attack, and they were not very common. And then there's Snorlax, who's another Zapdos counter lead. Let's move on to Gen 4. In Gen 4, that was the birth of the counter leads, and it basically turned all of lead into the first two-turn metagame. The reason for that was that Focus Sash was invented, Endeavor came out. And yes, I know that Focus Band existed in previous generations since Gen 2, but no one ever really used it. It was not very competitively viable. And Endeavor was super important to lead gameplay because it could bring, you could survive with a Focus Sash and bring your opponent down to 1 HP regardless of how much damage you would normally do to them. So it created strategy in leads. And don't forget, we didn't have Team Preview yet in Gen 4, and that is the big reason that Gen 4 had such an interesting meta for leads. Basically, lead strategy came down to one of a couple of things. You were either a suicide lead, you were a bulky lead, you were an anti-lead, or you were an anti-anti-lead. And it's really weird, but it all came down to basically the first two turns that determined what you did as a lead. So let's go through some of them. I'll be super quick with this. Azelf was a suicide lead. It had Stealth Rock. You put a Focus Sash on it, and it would explode the next turn if it brought down to its Focus Sash on turn 1. Aerodactyl was super fast, and had Taunt. So you would taunt basically anyone that you thought might do Stealth Rock's first turn, like an Azelf or something, and then you would Stealth Rock yourself second turn. Maybe they attacked you first turn and brought you down to your Sash. You're still really fast. You'll get Stealth Rocked up second turn. All is right as rain. Frostlass was also a popular one because of Spike's Destiny Bond. Get up a layer of spikes and then just take down the person that's attacking you with you. Again, all Focus Sash. Almost all of these guys carried Focus Sash, guys. Almost all of them. Gengar was another one. A big reason for Gengar being a suicide lead is that you couldn't fake him out. He had a really diverse move pool. You give him a Focus Sash. If the enemy lead taunts it, Gengar will just kill you anyway. Really offensive change, and it didn't even carry Stealth Rock, but it was still a suicide lead. Its goal was to kill and die. That was its goal. Not all Gengars were played that way, but it could have been a suicide lead. You also got Infernape. Infernape was popular because he had Fake Out. He was a really big Fake Out Stealth Rock user, and he could be special or mixed. That was really hard to deal with. You have Roserade, who was a Toxic Spiker, who could also cripple your opponents with Sleep Powder. Then you had Smeargle. You guys you'll come to realize I kind of hate Smeargle. I think it takes a lot of the fun out of Pokemon because it's so little skill to play it. Not that they're particularly dangerous. I'm not actually very scared of Smeargles when I fight against them because I carry Pokemon that do pretty good against them. But at the same time, I don't like that its entire skill set just comes down to use this move, then use this move, regardless of any situation, pretty much. So that's my big beef with Smeargle, but I need to talk about it because it was a big deal. It had Spore, it could learn Spikes or Stealth Rock, and a big thing that Smeargle also did was that it used Counter, and I'll explain why that's so important in just a second. Then you have, so yeah, I said you had your Suicide Leads. You also have your Bulky Leads. And the big thing with Bulky Leads is that they want to survive more than just the 2-turn meta that I'd been explaining kind of resulted from Gen 4 Leads. You want them to stick around for the rest of the match. They might be your wall, or they might just be a tank that you want to stick around, or they might have some other purpose, like Abomasnow, for example, who is one of the popular Bulky Leads. You need him for Hailstall teams. If someone messes up your weather, you need to set it up again. Hailstall was a thing where you'd have Abomasnow set up snow, or set up hail, and you try and get Wall Rain in. Usually after Abomasnow died, you could just bring it in if they didn't have a way to stop the weather. Weather, of course, was lasting permanently at that point, and Wall Rain had Ice Body, and then the way you would function a Wall Rain was literally substitute, protect, and if you were carrying leftovers and you were getting hail recovery, you'd earn back all the health you got from substitute in 2 turns. Perfectly. So you'd substitute, they'd break it, you'd protect, you'd set up a substitute, they'd break it, you'd protect, like, over and over. That was the point of Hailstall. That no longer works, obviously, but that was a really annoying strategy that was easy to overcome if you packed a way to counter it. You needed someone that was slow but also had priority. I'm not even going to get into it. This is old meta, guys. Old meta, and I'm taking way too long to get through it. Bronzong was a really popular Bulky Lead. Steel Psychic typing was super good defensively. Empoleon, another same reason, had a little bit of offense behind it. Fortress, Physical Lead, even Physical Leads had a hard time killing it because of how bulky it was, and it had so many purposes. It could bring any kind of setup it wanted. Spikes, Stealth Rock. It also carried Gyro Ball to hit fast leads super hard. It could Rapid Spin if it wanted to. That was why Fortress was popular, and is still today for the exact same reason. One Pokemon to do all of these jobs. Gliscor is pretty popular also. Pretty fast for a bulky Pokemon. It could carry Taunt. It could Scout with U-Turn. Pretty strong Earthquakes. It could like Roost also. Like very diverse Pokemon back then, and that was before Poison Heal was a thing. You had Heatran, same deal. It could tank attacks. It could taunt if it wanted to. It could set up Stealth Rocks. Hippowdon, same deal. Skarmory was a big deal. Swampert, just like before, and Tyranitar to set up Sand. Tyranitar was also super diverse. You could have given it a Choice Scarf. It could kill a bunch of things. Stuff like that. Scouts, I'm not going to go too deep into this. It's literally anyone with U-Turn was pretty much a Scout. And additional points if they also got Fake Out. You could see if they were trying to leave first turn or if they were scared because they wanted to defend their Focus Sash. Stuff like that. That was basically their job, was to see what the opponent wanted to do, might determine whether or not they're a Stealth Rock user or something like that, and just get out of there. That's all. That's the entire point of Scouts. Then you have your Counter Leads, or your Anti-Leads. These guys define the Gen 4 meta because they gave birth to the counter lead also. So these Pokemon, the Counter Lead Pokemon, basically beat all of the popular Suicide Leads in a 1v1, except for like a couple. Like maybe one Anti-Lead would beat all of them except one. They'd almost always gain momentum right out of the gate because of that exact reason, and the popularity of Anti-Lead Pokemon actually gave birth to the idea that you need to bring a Pokemon that will counter these Anti-Lead Pokemon. So that was a super big thing that caused a lot of metagame shifts over the course of Gen 4. So the most defining thing about these Pokemon is that they could hit hard and then kill you with a priority attack. So the big Pokemon that could do that, Dragonite, hits you super hard from both ends of the spectrum, could carry a really hard-hitting Draco Meteor and then kill you with E-Speed. Machamp, same deal. Machamp, though. Machamp is the king of the anti-leads from Gen 4. I love Machamp. I still love Machamp. He had no guard dynamic punch, so he was going to hit with that dynamic punch every time unless, they were Ghost. And then he'd confuse you. So besides the fact that he could pretty much bring any Suicide Lead down to their Focus Sash, they are now confused, and it's very likely that they're not going to get their second turn. So Pokemon that went for taunt first turn or something like that are now basically screwed. They basically just gave themselves up. This anti-lead pretty much, I don't want to say exclusively, but it really, really influenced the prevalence of Lumberry being a thing, because it was so common to carry Dynamic Punch, and if you wanted to counter Machamp, you needed to have it. You had to. Otherwise, if you can't kill it in one shot, and very few Pokemon could reliably, then you're just going to get confused, and then you're gambling whether or not you'll take it out with a 2-hit KO. Mamoswine was also popular. Earthquake Ice Shard. Could carry Stealth Rock too. Really popular anti-lead. Starmie also. Fast and strong and learns Rapid Spin. Here's the big thing for what Starmie used to love to do was come in against the Suicide lead, bring it down to its Focus Sash, and then kill it with Rapid Spin. And the beauty was it didn't care if it was faster or slower, unless they were going to kill it themselves, but Starmie would bring it down to its Focus Sash, and then if the opponent outsped, then they got Stealth Rocks up, and then Starmie would kill it and sweep it away, and if it was faster, it'd kill it with Rapid Spin anyway. That was Starmie's big deal back in the day. Now I talked about the counter leads, and there's lots of defining factors about what makes this. Generally speaking, it's Pokemon who resist the flinch from Fake Out, or Pokemon who learn Fake Out themselves and do it really well, Pokemon who outspeed common leads or anti-leads, and pack moves that are going to like kill them in one hit or bring them down to their sash, and priority just like the anti-leads had. And typically the most defining factor though is these Pokemon can beat anti-leads. So these popular Pokemon would be Metagross, for example. Metagross was the anti-lead because who was the anti-lead? Machamp. So Metagross would survive a 2-hit KO from a Dynamic Punch. It would usually carry a Lum, so it would survive, or it wouldn't get confused, and then it could 2-hit KO Machamp with a Meteor Mash that wasn't going to miss thanks to No Guard. It survives Azov's Fire Blast, and it'll 2-hit KO back by going Meteor Mash and then Bullet Punch for priority. It can Stealth Rock itself if it wanted to. It's super... I love this part about it. You could watch videos on this. You just Google it. It would play mind games with Aerodactyl, and that was a big thing for a lot of tournament play, is that Aerodactyl would go, well, if I taunt it, it might kill me in, like, just go Bullet Punch, or something like that. But if I don't taunt it, it might set up Stealth Rocks, and I'm not going to kill it anyway. So it was this great, beautiful meta, and it could also learn Pursuit, so sometimes the Aerodactyl will try and get out of there, they get hit by a Pursuit, brought down to their set. It was so much fun to watch some of the mind games that happened from that. Lucario was another really popular one. Super pigeonholed in its purpose, though. Its point was, it had inner focus, so you couldn't fake it out, but it could pack Focus Sash just like everything else, just like all the normal Suicide leads, but it aims to like get a KO on some of them. Awesome Pokemon to watch the mind games that came from playing against like Infernape, who was a really popular Suicide lead, and Lucario, because you couldn't get the Fake Out off on the Lucario with the Infernape. There would be no point, because he wouldn't get flinched, and he'd get his attack off anyway and bring the Infernape down to his Focus Sash, and then he'd Bullet Punch to... Super interesting to watch that, but really super pigeonholed. Like, he had his E-Speed. Sorry, not Bullet Punch. He didn't get Bullet Punch into... No, he did get it. He got it in Platinum. But a lot of the bulky leads would just one-hit KO it with Earthquake, so he would often carry Counter. Really pigeonholed, though. Really counter physical leads and stuff like that. And he didn't really set up Rocks ever, so that was pointless for him. Weavile found a really similar niche in that he had Fake Out, but he also had Taunt. So it could Fake Out first turn to see if they're staying in, Taunt second turn if it saw that they were staying in, things like that. It can go super offensive to kill Suicide leads, or it could pack a Focus Sash and counter just like the Lucario. Ambipom, literally the only reason this thing was popular is that Technician made Fake Out hit hard, and it could U-turn to Scout. Then you had your Baton Pass chains. I do not want to get into Baton Passing. It's super, super complex, but also very straightforward. Not a whole lot of strategy goes into it, because every Pokemon needs to get their boosts off in order to make the receiver super strong. The order you do it in matters, but like I just don't want to talk about it as far as this is concerned. But just know that really popular baton passers at that point of the metagame were Vaporeon, Gliscor, Celebi, Mew, and Ninjask. They were the big ones. Because of how important the lead war became in Gen 4, though, Ghosts also became super valuable because they were immune to Rapid Spin. You didn't want your Suicide lead to set up rocks just to have them get swept away like 2 turns later. You just lost a Pokemon for nothing. You don't want their sacrifice to be in vain, so almost always if they packed a Suicide lead, they packed a Ghost also. Gen 5, this is where the metagame became hyper offensive. I did not like Gen 5, truth be told. The power creep was so real, you couldn't run semi-stall. Basically, almost all teams became weather teams in one way or another, either to respond to another person setting up the weather, or they themselves set up the weather. It was ridiculous. Choice items became super prevalent. There was the introduction of like opposite defense, opposite attacks that hit, or attacks that hit the opposite defense, like Psyshock. The most prevalent sweepers became a real issue because they could one-hit KO most of the metagame, and the ones that they couldn't, they could if they had just a little bit of damage done on them first, which made Stealth Rock perfect, or a little bit of whittling was all you needed. So you had your mid-game sweepers, which I mentioned before. You just Volt Turn a few times on some key threats, bring in your late-game sweeper, and literally just clean the floor up for the next 5 Pokemon that are remaining or whatever. That was a common part. Watch a lot of Shofu's videos. He did really well in Gen 5. That's when I started watching Shofu. He's ridiculous. He had the eye. He could just tell when it was the right time to start sweeping. Super strong battler. You watch almost any of his fights. He got it. He would like get up his rocks and maybe take out one Pokemon and be like, that's what I needed to do. Bring in his sweeper and then go to town. So, point being, the weather war was the big introduction of the lead consideration in Gen 5, because now you had hidden abilities and you had drought and rain, drizzle. Thank you. Drought and drizzle became a prevalent part of the meta. Now weather war is more important than ever. So, but here's another big thing. Team Preview changed everything. Suicide leads are basically gone now because it's too easy to see who a Suicide lead is, and you just need to pack one anti-lead on your team anywhere. It doesn't need to be a lead anymore, because in Gen 4, you didn't know what anyone was bringing, so you always put out your lead or your anti-lead first. In Gen 5, as long as you had someone who had some kind of anti-lead properties, you didn't need to lead with them. You just had them in your team in case they had a Suicide lead. That's all you needed to do. So Suicide leads kind of fell out of prevalence. A few of them still stuck around, like Aerodactyl, but they really kind of went away. So who were the common leads of Gen 5? And this is super important because you will see a lot of these guys in Gen 6. Even though there's been the nerf to weather, I'll get into that. You'll still see the Weather War people, Politoed, Tyranitar, Hippowdon, and Ninetales. You'll still see those guys. Politoed, Rain was the most dominant weather type. So many Rain teams. It had such great defensive and offensive utility between 100% accuracy, Thunder, and increased water damage, and water's a great attacking type. Reduced damage of fire, and Steel was so important to counter dragons. Super, super common to see that. Tyranitar and Hippowdon, their big thing was they always won the Weather War. The slower Pokemon always won the Weather War. They both also got Stealth Rock, which made them pretty good leads. Ninetales, literally only there to set up Sun. It loses the Weather War to all other setters because it's too fast. It loses one-on-one in combat to all of the other setters too. It's set up fodder for a lot of the other hazard setters. It's only there to set up the Sun, and a lot of time you wouldn't even lead with it. You had your hazard leads too. The big thing about Gen 5 was that Deoxys D and Terrakion and Landorus joined the fray and were great leads. Deoxys D was super bulky and pretty fast. It could out-taunt some of the other taunters, not Aerodactyl, which is why Aerodactyl stayed popular. But it was a super reliable hazard setter. Super reliable, because it took so much to take it down. It had a really crazy diverse move pool, and it could be carrying so many different items. So it was really interesting Pokemon to set up hazards. Even if you brought a counter for it, a lot of the time you'd get red carded out. It'd carry red card pretty frequently, so pretty dependable way to get up your hazards with a defensive Pokemon. Terrakion and Landorus, their big thing was they're really reliable because they would threaten out leads. They hit so hard. The power creep, like I said, was insane. If they were carrying offensive items like Life Orb or Choice Band or Choice Scarf, you got to be careful because they could just completely kill someone first turn, you know? But they could also carry Setup with with Stealth Rock or whatever. So you had to be really careful. Landorus T was particularly dangerous because it'd come in and intimidate, so now physical sweepers probably aren't going to take it out. It could take a hit from almost any of those guys, get Stealth Rocks ups, and then get out of there with U-turns. So that was the big thing with that. Aerodactyl's still there. And then you do have the return of the anti-leads. Here's the big thing. Dragonite's still one of those anti-leads. Hits you hard, both sides of the scale, and could E-speed you. Could also set up. Mienshao, and I love this Pokemon. I still use Mienshao to this day for pretty much the same reason. He could get in, he could fake out, really fast, pretty hard-hitting fake out, packed really good coverage moves, high damage moves, and it could U-turn, and it got Regenerator, so it could be taking damage. You didn't really mind that much. You could keep him healthy pretty much the entire game, coming in as a revenge killer, whittling and getting out of there. Really served the offensive metagame well, even if he himself wasn't the strongest Pokemon on his own. Smeargle, same as always, totally skill-less, prediction-free Pokemon. You just follow the flowchart. Basically, Gen 5 Smeargle in a nutshell. Do you definitely outspeed your opponent? If yes, use Spore, then Shell Smash, then Baton Pass. You didn't have the grasses immune to Spore back then, so you pretty much just Spore anybody that you outsped. If you don't, Shell Smash, survive with a Focus Sash, and then just Baton Pass out of there. Or you could survive with the Focus Sash and Spore anyway, but usually people didn't do that. The reason it was more popular in 5th gen than 4th gen was because of Shell Smash. Shell Smash was so good. Broken good. Really strong boosting move that it got introduced. And there's also way fewer fake out users in Gen 5 than there were in Gen 4. So if you didn't see any in Team Preview, you knew you were safe to bring Smeargle. Pretty much simple as that. You didn't need to be scared of Focus Sash suicide leads with Smeargle. You could just do your thing and get out of there with a Baton Pass. Zoroark was also a popular anti-lead. I love Zoroark. I love catching people or watching people get caught off guard by Zoroark. And I'm getting caught off guard. I get caught off guard too. Zoroark's great. You bring in Zoroark, masquerading as whatever, like a fighting type, and then like, oh, hit it with Psychic. Doesn't affect you. You get a nasty plot off, and then you proceed to sweep. That's the Zoroark lead. Gen 6. And I call Gen 6 why it's important to choose correctly the first time. Gen 6 is awesome because it's so much more momentum based. It's the way I want to play Pokemon. Pokemon is a chess game now. There's so many different lead options. Anything I listed before could still be a lead. But the beauty of it is that there's introduction of new threats like Galvantula as a Sticky Webber. But you also get this weird counter meta because there's so many more punishment moves now. Knockoff in the previous generation was weak. Very few people used it. You used it if you were really scared of certain Pokemon's items, but for the most part, it wasn't used offensively. Now it's a huge offensive and support move, and so it's better than ever. Pursuit is losing popularity, but it still exists. The big Pursuit user of all time, previous generations, you saw it on Tyranitar, but more importantly, you saw it on Scizor, Choice Band Scissor. So it's sort of losing prevalence now. Scissor's dropping in usage, and sometimes it runs Mega, and if it runs Mega, it usually doesn't go Pursuit quite often. And Fake Out is still popular, so maybe more so now because VGC is increasing its popularity, stuff like that. The high offense meta still exists, but a few key meta changes gave a huge advantage to defensive Pokemon, so they can finally start to have more of a purpose again rather than just surviving a one-hit KO by a lot of super high damage Pokemon. So the crit modifier got reduced to 1.5 from 2, and to 2 from 3 for snipers or whatever. And the anti-dragon meta finally wins. Thanks to Fairy's immunity, Steel's resist, Dragon typing is finally becoming more of an offensive liability if you're using it too early, rather than the whole outrage everything strat that happened in the last couple of generations. Dragons are still obviously incredibly viable. I'm not trying to say they're not, but you know, they're definitely dropping in prevalence now. Really, the primary dragon threats of note are Mega Charizard X and Garchomp. Latios is still there, but not because it outrages, you know, for different reasons. Latios is just super strong for that. So, and Weather got nerfed. Thank dog it got nerfed. Thank dog. So finally, after 6 generations, we get to a place where choosing your lead is purely strategic and not decided before the battle even begins, usually. So, thanks to Team Preview from Gen 5, the Weather Nerf from Gen 6, the Offensive Slowdown from Gen 6, the Hazard Meta from Gen 3, the Counter Hazard Meta from Gen 4, Counter Lead Meta from Focus Ashes and Prankster Taunts from Gen 3, 4, 5, we finally have sufficient reason to think about our leads before we do it in the team preview and the team building process. So some Pokemon are still obvious leads, and this is what we're going to go into now, how to identify them. Who's a good lead now? There's too many options for me to just bring up all at once. The game has done a great job fostering competitive play because now there's so many different desirable lead options. It's not super obvious who you're going to lead with right from the get-go. It's a game of chess, and who's going to take turn 1 momentum advantage and keep it. Despite all the meta changes, there are still some Pokemon who are designed to lead. That is their job. They are there, they need the free switch in, and they're not likely to get it late in the game if stealth rocks are set up or without like coming in on a revenge, but the longer their hazards are set up, the better. These are your obvious leads that you need to know as soon as you see them. This is an obvious lead. Not a guaranteed, but an obvious one. Galvantula, he's a sticky webber. Frail as anything. It needs the first turn. It needs to keep its focus sash intact. Usually, you can play mind games with that, but usually, and it just needs to come in. It needs to keep its focus sash intact. It needs to set up sticky web. It's fast enough that a majority of the taunt users won't outspeed it. Obviously, there's notable exceptions. Any prankster user, stuff like that. Ariados is also a sticky webber, but way worse. Shuckle is also a sticky webber, but is bulky enough that a lot of the time you don't see him lead. So you don't need to like call him an obvious lead. He might just be on the team and pack sticky web. Smeargle is also a crazy obvious lead. Smeargle cannot switch in mid-game. He can't. He does not have the defenses or the speed in order to do anything from that. But he's still a very common lead. Now it becomes a little bit more interesting, the kind of moves he will pack, but still, as always, pretty obvious baton passer. Here's the big thing. Expect one or all of these moves to be expect one or all of these moves to be something that consists of his move pool. He either is going to have Spore or Dark Void. Why would you have one over the other? Spore is 100% accuracy, but Grass types and Powder Goggles makes you immune to it. Also Insomnia, but whatever. Dark Void, there is no immunity to it except for Insomniacs, but it's only 80 accuracy. So that's your kind of gamble there. It's not super accurate, but whatever. And you also might see Smeargles that are multi-purpose. They might be used in doubles also, stuff like that. Then you're probably going to see some kind of boosting move, either Shell Smash, Geomancy, or Belly Drum. You just probably will. That's usually what he aims to do. And to get a boost off, if it's Shell Smash, he might be carrying the White Herb or the Focus Sash. If it's Geomancy, it's Power Herb. Has to be. Belly drum could be pretty much anything at that point. Usually like a berry of some kind, like citrus. And if he carries one of those, he'll carry Baton Pass, and he might also carry Sticky Web or Taunt. That's if one or all of those moves will be what's on a Smeargle move pool. If he has something else, then he's going for something kind of gimmicky. But that's pretty much every Smeargle, and those are the things you should be prepared to handle a Smeargle doing to you. Another really obviously just Fortress. Doesn't have a ton of offensive presence to bring into the meta bring into the match mid game. Not really any offensive presence. Defensively, it's a little lacking because it doesn't have any recovery. Just it plays a really good hazard Pokemon early game. It can carry basically any of the primary damage hazards, Toxic Spikes, and Stealth Rock, and it can rapid spin them away. That's the big deal of Fortress. So, how to predict an opposing lead. And this is probably one of the big things that you guys came to the channel for, or came to this video for. We're really getting into the strategy of the episode now. This is the meat and the potatoes here. Not all leads are obvious. Some Pokemon will have telltale signs that make them superior lead choices, and some Pokemon are very, very unlikely choices. And the important thing is to determine which Pokemon fit that role when you're looking at team preview. So first thing you should do is look at who's not going to be a lead. Usually you can strike off 50% of the Pokemon on an opponent's team pretty much right off the bat. Here are Pokemon that are typically not going to lead. Pokemon that lack any kind of support move. If it doesn't learn hazards, if it doesn't learn taunt, if it doesn't have status, some way to cripple, volt turn, or an ability that have some sort of early game purpose like intimidate, and at that point there's really no reason for it to lead. Not to say that a player won't do it, but a good player knows that you're going to get more benefit out of having a Pokemon that has one of those moves. That's going to be where you gain momentum. Starting right off the bat with someone just because they hit hard, that's kind of a rookie play, to be perfectly honest. Like, unless it's like a perfect prediction to counter what they're going to do. But again, I mean, that's just, we're talking pro plays at that point. So general consensus is that if they don't pack any kind of support move at all, they're not a good lead choice, and you might as well just strike it off the list of someone that you're scared of leading. 2 is late game sweepers, and these are typically like I said in the last video, very frail, very fast, very hard hitting Pokemon who lack scouting moves like Volt Switch, U-Turn, Fake Out, stuff like that. They need the support of their team to set them up, put them in a position where they can late game sweep. A couple of Megas, like Mega Pinsir, generally speaking, is more of a mid-game or late-game sweeper. Not likely to be a lead. Not likely. And other Pokemon. The problem with this one is that it's not always obvious who's a late-game sweeper and who's not, but you can sometimes look at their team and kind of determine who's going to be their late game sweeper pretty early. Like, usually it's frail Pokemon. You see it a lot in the lower tiers. Like Cacturn is a great example of a late game sweeper. You don't want Cacturn coming in mid game. He just doesn't have the defenses. He needs a safe switch in, and he needs some of his threats to have been weakened. Another thing is special walls. I would say all walls, except that there's a lot of support moves that are pretty common on physical walls, like entry hazards and stuff like that. So choosing a wall as a lead immediately loses you momentum out of the gate if they're not going to do anything when they're in. And that's a big thing with special walls, because they either like hit you or maybe they'll put a status on you. But a lot of the time they carry a lot of the support moves. A lot of your clerics are special walls. Your Sylveons, your Umbreons, your Blissies, Chanseys, Clefables, and Florges, stuff like that. They're all special walls, and they're not great leads. They're just, so a lot of the time you can rule them out. If they choose to leave with them, maybe they got something up their sleeve, or maybe you can just take advantage of it. I mean, you gotta play it by ear, you know? There are a few exceptions. I just want to put this out there. Tentacruel, Heatran, and Roserade are pretty common special walls or especially bulky Pokemon. Tentacruel, of course, carries Toxic Spikes and can have Rapid Spin, so he's a pretty common lead choice. Actually, if you see a Tentacruel, you should probably predict that it's going to lead. Heatran, it could be a special tank, but it could be a crazy offensive presence like early on, and it can carry Stealth Rock. You shouldn't immediately rule that one out. Heatran could be a lead. And it doesn't even matter what set he is. He could be a good lead if he's offensive or defensive. Roserade, another kind of the same deal. He's pretty good choice to be a specially defensive Pokemon. Carries Sleep Powder, carries Spikes and Toxic Spikes. And it can be really offensive. It's got 90 speed, which is reasonable. Outspeeds some, like all of the base 80 speeds with positive nature. And it gets 125 base special attacks. So can hit pretty hard and can take out a lot of the common ground type leads. So don't rule Roserade out either. Another thing is setup. Now this is hard because a lot of Pokemon can set up, but not all Pokemon necessarily do run boosting sets. So just know that typically you shouldn't be worried about someone trying to boost up to sweep your entire team on turn 1. If they try and do that and they succeed, your team probably needs to be looked at. You need to have answers to Pokemon boosting. Boosting is super common in the meta right now. If they're choosing to play that way, it's just usually not a good idea to lead with that kind of Pokemon. Lead with someone whose job is to boost and then win. Not a good lead idea. You just take one turn to get your hazards up, and then you either phase them or you take them out with an answer that you have to that Pokemon. You shouldn't ever have a Pokemon on your opponent's team that is a threat to your entire team. You don't have a check and counter, and they can boost, because there's no way to get around that. You gotta have answers. That's team building 101, guys. You gotta make sure that you have answers to all the Pokemon that could be on your opponent's team, or at least as much as you can with only 6. If they don't have an obvious lead, and you have an obvious lead, kind of what do you do here? So, like, your opponent will likely lead with someone to counter your obvious lead, if that's going to be the case. It could be a Taunter, it could be an offensive set that excels at killing your guy. A lot of people will have Galvantula counters. Sticky Web's pretty annoying in the meta, so a lot of people will carry Galvantula counters, stuff like that. That could influence who you choose to lead with. If you know that, like if you see a Pokemon, you go, I know that Ambipom is coming, and I know that Ambipom shuts down my my Galvantula lead, or Weavile, another good example, totally counters Galvantula leads. Fake out first turn, kill it second turn, that Galvantula's never getting a move off. So you might need to be on the lookout for things like that. Have that influence your decision. Know your own team as well as you can. Know what you're scared of. See if you have a massive flaw that could be taken advantage of. If your opponent typically packs answers for your lead, find out what those answers are, and then determine whether or not to lead with your obvious lead if you see those threats. If neither of you have an obvious lead, this is where the mind games begin, and this is so much fun. This is the thing that makes me love Pokemon after all these years. I just love it. Look to see if they have a Pokemon who checks and counters lots of Pokemon on your team. If they do, either lead with the check to that Pokemon, or be prepared to switch in the Pokemon if they choose to lead with that Pokemon. Like, have that ready. Have your first 2 turns decided. I'm going to lead with this. If he leads with that, I'm bringing in its counter. Vice versa, like if it's pretty obvious that you have someone that checks their entire team, expect them to know that. Expect them to look and go, I guess I never noticed it before, but that Latios, if it's choice specs, will literally kill 5 of my 6 Pokemon. It's pretty likely that they're going to lead with that Latios counter then. So, what do? You bring someone who counters their counter. 2-step process. Another thing to consider is that, do you have Pokemon that can take advantage of switches? If so, play the punishment lead metagame. Do you have a Pokemon with U-turn to keep momentum? Scouting is still really common in 6th gen. Do you have status moves that can cripple these incoming Pokemon? Do you have Pursuit to punish a bad lead choice? Like if they lead with someone and you know they're switching out, can you Pursuit trap them? Like, a Gengar, or some people recently I've been seeing lead with Alakazam a lot. Pursuit trap him, get him out of there. Another thing is knockoff. Knockoff is super prevalent in this metagame now. It's catching on, taking the world by storm. So knockoff can punish switches. So if you win the matchup war, you switch in a Pokemon or you lead with a Pokemon that's going to dominate their Pokemon. They're going to have to get out of there, knock off the incoming Pokemon. You're going to cripple them. Getting rid of a key item. You never know. You could also like figure out, like, do you have an intentional counter lead? If that's the case, use it. You know, like it's a good idea to bring a counter lead or have someone with counter lead capabilities on their team. So I'm going to look at a few examples now. This is what we're going to get into now. So I'm going to switch over to this mode, and we're going to go over a few, and I'm not actually going to show you this one. Switch back to face cam only for a second while I find the right ones here. So one thing I'm going to show is the battle I had against the only person currently on the statue right now, Stevie Z. This is when I brought my monotype gym, my monotype electric gym. So let's have a look right now. Bring up this right here. So let's go over my thought process here. I'm bringing a pure electric type team, right? Big considerations. Gliscor could be a potential lead here because he walls so much of the game, but it's probably more likely that he's not going to lead with Gliscor, because if he leads with someone else, he could just switch in the Gliscor on an anticipated lightning attack or electric attack. Another thing you note here is that he could do that with Manectric also. Before he Mega Evolves, he has Lightning Rod, he can take advantage of that. Klefki is a potential lead because he can run Prankster Spikes. Another potential lead is the Toxic Spike Tentacruel. And then I immediately rule out, for reasons I said earlier, the Umbreon and the Dragonite. So those two Pokemon, you're not going to see an Umbreon because he's a support Pokemon. He's a special wall. There's not really much reason to have him. So I rule him out. Dragonite is a boosting sweeper usually, and not really much reason. You run these guys. I'm gonna rule them out probably because they're counters like to some of my teams, so he's not gonna want to lead with them. These are your two potentials. So who do I lead with? Looking at that, the big thing here is that pretty much anyone I lead with could counter the Tentacruel. But the big deal here is that I'm running two physical Pokemon, and Tentacruel has pretty poor physical defense. So I'm going to lead with a physical Pokemon. I'm ruling out all of my specials. I choose not to lead with my my Luxray, because Luxray is a Choice Banded and Guts variant that I choose to run that I think's really unique, because it can switch in on an anticipated status move, and then it can hit super hard because it's got both Guts and Choice Band. A lot of people will opt to run like Flame Orb or Toxic Orb in order to self-give them a status, but I choose not to do that. So that's one option, but I'm going to rule that one out in favor of my Electros, who packs Knockoff and a Scouting move in U-turn, and is kind of bulky, so he can survive if he did choose to lead with an offensive Pokemon, and is electric and likely to counter Tentacruel. So what happens? We can click here, click play. Did I predict correctly? Stevie Z is issuing a challenge. And he brings out the Tentacruel. Perfect. I start with an Electros. We're in good spots. So then we come into this, we get to play additional mind games following that to see what comes next. Switch back to face cam only. And let's have a look at another battle versus one of my friends on my friends list named DS. Where are you hiding? No, I got it right here. My bad. Okay. So, bring this up again. Let's think thought process here, okay? So, what do we have? We have I need to adjust this again. This is annoying. We've got... This is one of my competition teams, and I kind of love it, and I'm not going to talk too much about it right now. If you guys have any questions about it, just go ahead and ask me. It's a semi-stall team, a balanced semi-stall team, and what I have here is an Excadrill that carries both Rapid Spin and Stealth Rocks. So it's a pretty obvious lead to a lot of people. I don't know whether or not DS predicts it, but here's what I'm going to look at. Why would I not bring it? I wouldn't bring it if he's going to lead with Skarmory. Do I think he's going to lead with Skarmory? He's a potential spiker. That's a possibility. But if he is, I'm not too worried about it because he doesn't do too much damage to my my Excadrill. He can't really threaten me out. Meanwhile, I could proceed to just Rapid Spin away his things if I really wanted to just stay in there while he's trying to spike. I'm forcing him to choose to make moves. So it's still, even with Skarmory, it's still a good idea to be leading with my Excadrill. Another thing we could look at is, will he lead with Blaziken? So Blaziken obviously is... Speed Boost Blaziken is obviously banned in Smogon, but I have built my team in order to handle a lot of the Smogon ban threats because I don't know whether I'm playing against people online who obey those threats, you know? Sometimes I play against people in Ubers, and I like to beat them with my OU teams, you know? So part of the reason I'm not scared of Blaziken is that I pack a Choice Scarf on my Excadrill. So I will outspeed, and I will one-shot with Earthquake. So, check, it is good if he leads with that. The Grand Bull carrying Intimidate, it's not a great matchup for me. He could pack Earthquake and hit me pretty hard. I'm not an air balloon, but for the most part, I'm not worried because if he does have that, I have safe switch-ins for him, so he doesn't gain too much momentum by leading with a Grand Bull either because he's mostly a sweeper. So, check, I'm okay with that. It's not the best matchup in the world, but I'm okay with a Grand Bull lead. If he leads with Dusclops, I am not worried about it against Excadrill because my immediate switch-in would be Arcanine. Arcanine will take the incoming Will-O-Wisp that is so obvious and can proceed to burn back while being immune to the Willow. I got off a Intimidate, so he's not likely to hit hard with Sucker Punch or whatever he's going to carry. I've had plenty of experience having Arcanine fight with Dusclopses in a one-on-one, totally fine with it, and usually results in them trying to just switch out. So am I okay with this? Yes. What we have here is a Lucario. It's possibly a Mega Lucario. We already know because of the Blaziken that he's not following Smogon. Again, totally fine. If he chooses not to do that. But am I worried about a Lucario? No. I'll outspeed and kill one hit with my Choice Scarfed Earthquake. So, not worried about the Lucario. Leaving only the Alakazam. Now, could be a Mega Alakazam also, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be a Mega Lucario. The thing about Alakazam is there's a couple of scenarios where I'm okay with him leading with Alakazam and a couple where I'm not. The big thing here is that I don't think an Alakazam will take me out unless it's Choice Scarfed and packing Focus Blast. And even if it is, Focus Blast is really terrible accuracy. In other circumstances, if he's not carrying a Choice Scarf, and he's not Mega, then it's likely that he's carrying either a Focus Sash or Choice Specs. Again, I'm not super worried about whether or not he's going to pack something that's going to be super effective on me and take me out in one hit, and I'm pretty sure I'll outspeed, and so if he does survive with a Focus Sash, I'll just take him out next turn. So am I okay with the Alakazam? Yes. So, all of that went through my head, lickety-split. I'm okay with choosing the Excadrill lead. I think it gets me the most common things. Who do I expect him to lead with? I'm thinking probably the Blaziken. It's really obvious to get the Protect and the boost going on, but as it turns out, he doesn't. He actually ends up leading with the Alakazam, and so I'm just going to show you guys the first couple of turns to see if my thought process was on point. I anticipate that he's not going to think I'm going to outspeed. I go straight for the Earthquake. I take out the Alakazam in one hit. It was likely a choice specs or something like that. So, Excadrill putting in work really early in the matchup. So, what else did I think I wanted to show one more here, and it's against my friend named Trevor. So where did I hide this one? I need to delete some of these videos, guys. Here we go. Here is Trevor, and the big thing, let's go through the thought process again. This was before the ban on GeneSect, guys, before the GeneSect ban, so I don't want to hear it. This is a team I was just playing around with for fun. I just put together randomly a couple of OU threats, and I don't even know. My friend Trevor bringing a lot of threats. So I look at his team. What do I immediately see? That's probably a Mega Pinsir. There's no reason for it not to be. It's his only potential Mega. I'm not particularly scared of a Mega Pinsir lead. I don't think it would happen, but as you'll see, like, it doesn't even matter if it would. So I'm not too worried about that. Here's another thing that I immediately look at. That's an ice weakness. That's an ice weakness. That's an ice weakness. That's an ice weakness. That is an ice-type Pokemon who is an anti-lead Pokemon. So it's seeming pretty likely that this is a good choice. Weavile is a good lead choice for me because it takes out these Pokemon. So let's continue to look. Who do I think he's going to lead with? Like I said before, if they don't carry support moves, it's not a great idea to lead with them. He might lead with the Chandelure because it can learn Trick, and it does a number on a lot of the Pokemon on my team. Well, yeah, it could do damage to a lot of those guys, but am I okay with him leading with that if I choose to lead with my Weavile? Yes. Am I okay with the Hippowdon, who's a more obvious lead in my eyes? Yes, because I can fake out first turn just to get a little bit of whittling damage off, run out the duration on Sandstorm a little bit, and I can't KO with an Ice Punch, but I'll do a hefty amount of damage, and if he chooses to go for the Earthquake, so be it. He didn't get his Stealth Rocks up, I come in and I finish off. So I'm okay with the Hippowdon lead. I don't think an Azu lead is obvious or likely, so let's cancel that one out. I also don't think that the Mega Pinsir is likely for the reasons I said before. Here's another boosting lead, and here's a mid-game or late-game sweeper. Again, not a common lead. So, given all that, I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that Weavile is a good lead choice here. So we click play. Who do I expect him to lead with? Probably the Hippowdon. Maybe it could be the Chandelure, and we have a look. And as it turns out, he does lead with the Chandelure. So there you go, guys. That's how it goes. So he's probably going to stay in, and he could Trick, but I go for the knockoff. Ends up one-shotting him, blah, 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 blah. That's the idea behind all of this, guys. So I think that's good enough for examples. And, you know, thanks a lot for stopping by and watching episode 2 of GTT, guys. If you have any other questions about leads or the thought process that goes into it, go ahead and leave me a comment or follow me on Twitter and leave me a message on Twitter. I check all my messages. I'll try my best to get back to you guys as soon as I can. But if you guys have any other questions at all, or if you just want to follow me, all of the social media, or all of the media annotations are going to be in the annotation down below. All of the social media links are going to be in my annotations down below. Thanks for stopping by, guys. As always, my name is Gym Leader Geo. You guys are the challengers, and I'll see you guys next time.